All right, we're going to read chapter 4 today, but they messed up the first word. It's at school the next day. No one learned very much, at least not about school subjects. Most of the boys and a lot of the girls were entered in the derby, and if they weren't, their parents or uncles or neighbors were. A lot of the teachers were fishing too, so talk ran more to tides and lures and hot spots than to past participles, the colonial period or metric measurement. Mrs. Madison, my English teacher, asked me where I was going to fish, and we spent most of fifth period talking about how Devil's Bridge had gotten its name. It wasn't really a bridge, of course, but a group of rocks that barely showed above the water at high tide. Mrs. Madison said so many ships had been wrecked on those rocks that the sailors used to say the devil himself had put them there. Meg Taylor said that was silly. Everyone knew that the rocks had been dumped there by a glacier. Jeff raised his hand and said the Wampanoags have a story about it too. The Wampanoags were the natives who had lived at the end of the island before white people came. Jeff and a couple other kids in the class were descended from them. The legend is, Jeff went on, that there was a giant named Mashop who lived in a cave in the clay cliffs. He brought the rocks to build himself a bridge to the mainland. But one day while he was working, a big crab bit his toe and he quit halfway through the job. The bell rang and I said to Jeff, well, all I know is those rocks make the greatest striper fishing spot on the whole island. Only 2 more periods and we'll be there. As soon as the bus dropped us off, Jeff and I ran to his house where Mrs. Manning was already making tuna fish and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Thanks, Mom, said Jeff. You didn't have to do that. We were going to make our own. I know, said his mother, putting the top layer of bread on the 6 sandwiches lined up on the counter. But I knew you were anxious to get out there and catch the big one. There, what else are you going to take? Jeff reached into the cupboard, grabbed a big bag of corn chips and 2 packs of cookies, and took a 6-pack of soda from the refrigerator. Here, said Jeff's mother. Take this along, too. It's hot cocoa. It's going to be pretty chilly out there tonight. She handed Jeff a thermos and added, do you 2 have some warm clothes with you? We nodded, putting the food into our backpacks. We were ready. You boys be careful now, Mrs. Manning called from the doorway as we rode down the driveway on our bikes. And good luck. You too, we shouted. Finally, we had the whole weekend ahead with nothing to do but fish. I couldn't stop smiling, even though the cold wind made my teeth hurt. Jeff and I zoomed down the beach road, hid our bikes, and walked across the damp sand to the cliffs. Leaving the packs on the beach, we climbed the steep, craggy mounds of red, black, white, and yellow clay. Their colors were dazzling in the afternoon sunlight, and I had to squint to see the narrow entrance in our secret cave. Inside, when our eyes had adjusted to the darkness, we found our gear just the way we had left it. Jeff and I had discovered the cave 3 years earlier and had vowed not to tell anyone about it, but I had slipped one night and mentioned it to my father. To my surprise, not only did he know about the cave, but it had been his secret hideout when he was a boy. He'd even carved his initials on the back wall where I found them later. I didn't know why, but since Pop died, the cave was the place where I felt closest to him. And when I missed him so bad I didn't know what to do, I went to the cave. Sitting in its damp coolness looking out at the sea, I could pretend he was with me. I could hear his voice and almost feel his hand on my shoulder. What lure are you going to start with? Jeff asked, picking up his rod and tackle box. I didn't have to think about that. A blue popper, I answered. Mr. Olson said they're hitting on yellow, Jeff said doubtfully. Mr. Olson was our math teacher. Mr. Olson can fish with yellow then, I replied. I'm using blue. I think I'll try metal, Jeff said as we descended the cliffs. Or maybe a bucktail, he added. I laughed. We've got all night, I said. You can try 'em all. Yeah, shouted Jeff, beginning to run. We can fish our brains out, I called. You already did that a long time ago, Daggett, said Jeff with a wicked smile. Maybe I did, I said, tying the popper onto my line. But when I'm hauling them in and you're begging to use one of my lures, we'll see if you think I'm so dumb. I stepped into the waders that used to belong to my mother. They were like big rubber overalls with boots attached. I loved the feel of them. With waders on, I wasn't stuck on land anymore. I was almost a creature of the sea. I could walk out into the crashing surf up to my waist with the cold water swirling all around me and be warm and dry inside. Holding my rod straight back over my shoulders, I brought it forward with a smooth, forceful motion that sent my plug flying far out into the breaking waves. I aimed just to the left of a large rock, waited a minute to let the lure land, then began reeling it in slowly, holding the rod tip high so that the lure skimmed across the surface, creating a disturbance that the stripers would, I hoped, mistake for a wounded, struggling bait fish. It was a good cast. Reeling carefully to avoid another smaller rock and a floating clump of seaweed, I brought the plug in to shore and prepared to cast again. Jeff was 50 yards or so down the beach, flinging a metal spoon into the water. I didn't have to see his face to know that it was a mask of concentration. There are some things, like washing the dishes or riding a bike or mowing the lawn, that you can do while you're thinking about something else, but not fishing. And especially not fishing during a derby when so much is at stake. I felt the steady tug on my lure as I brought it through the water, ready to set the hook if a fish struck. The salt spray filled my eyes and nose. The sun sank lower in the sky and sparkled on the water, and I felt the kind of happiness I felt only when I was fishing. I got one, I heard Jeff's excited shout, and I looked over to see his rod bowed over from the pull of a fish. The next moment, I too felt a sudden strike, and my reel screamed as the fish took out line. I got one too, I hollered. It's acting like a blue. All at once, nothing. I was right. It had been a bluefish. Its sharp teeth had cut right through my line. It got my lure, I called disgustingly. Darn pests, I muttered as I reeled in my empty line. I didn't mean it, though. Bluefish were strong fighters, good to eat and fun to catch. But when you fished for them, you used a piece of wire between your lure and your lines so they couldn't bite their way free. The trouble was, other fish, like stripers, were more picky, and when they saw the wire, they wouldn't bite. Jeff was lucky. He hauled in a small blue without losing his lure. I walked over and watched him carefully unhook the fish, hold it in the water, move it forward and back a few times to get oxygen passing through its gills, and then release it. Maybe a bluefish would end up winning the derby, but there was no reason to keep a small one like that. I'm going to wait until these little blues pass through, I said. I don't want to lose another lure. I think I'll keep casting in case that fish has got a big brother, said Jeff. Okay, I guess I'll go check out the action on the other side of the point.